Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Anti-Federalist Radio, providing you with libertarian perspectives and opinions on current events for the liberty-minded. We are taking the fight to the airwaves as we stand for liberty, oppose tyranny, and give equal opportunity in exposing the hypocrisy of the Democrats and the Republicans. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Joe and Joe.
Greetings, folks. It's good to be with you. A lot has happened this past week. I am Joe Sloop, your economic host. I was a former meteorologist turned weather forecaster, turned now economic forecaster, and I will bring to you my over 10 years of forecasting experience to give you the glimpse and insights into what's going on in the markets today in the U.S. and around the world.
And I am also, Joe, your social host, working-class Marine Corps veteran, and street-level activist for the Libertarian Party.
So there are several things that have been going on this week. Two of them are economic. Two of them have been social-political that have been going on. I, of course, will be covering your economic points, and my counterpart will be covering the social-political points. So to name them off, the major one is that as the United States begins its reopening phases back to a sense of normality, or what the statists would like to call today the new normal, our economy is continuing to collapse back and forth as companies are starting to go out of business. And we'll be covering that day. And then we'll also be covering another looming threat that will be coming down the pipeline, and that's the threat of inflation. Meanwhile, while this has been going on, this hasn't gone unnoticed to the American public. The American people have constantly been getting restless and have been staging numerous protests in front of state capitals all across the nation. This has inspired protests all across the world as civil liberties have been threatened in the name of public health and the greater good and security. And among those is there have been stages of armed protest actually been going on at the capitals, and we are going to have the pleasure of hosting a caller who is actually an active member of the Libertarian Party. His name is Ryan. He will be calling in about 8:30 or so, and Joe and I will both be interviewing him and asking him some questions about what's going on with that process and the state of affairs. What are their goals? What's their objective? And how successful are they in defending our liberties and fighting back against the state, and what things can we do to help them and support them? But first off, the economic news. So just this past week, Hertz has filed for bankruptcy. Now, Hertz has been one of several major named brands of companies that have been around for decades that have filed for bankruptcy in the name of the coronavirus. So after the state started cracking down on what they considered to be non-essential activities inside of our economy, in the name of protecting us from the spread of the highly infectious disease, the COVID-19, which has been dubbed the coronavirus, there have been several companies that have not been able to handle the stress. Hertz has buckled mainly because if in the airport industry, nearly all travel going to different countries, going to and from airports, going to different cities have completely shut down. And Hertz makes a lot of its revenue off of those people flying in and out because they usually have to rent cars to travel. And so that has destroyed a lot of their revenue-generating sources, and that's going to have feedback loops in the economy. Now, they were the third company that I know of off the top of my head. And, Joe, you can jump in and add to this list if you know of any more. But the other two that I know of that were big names were JCPenney and Logan's Roadhouse. Now, Logan's Roadhouse had been under financial duress for some time, and so have some of the clothing stores that have been battling with more online retailers like Amazon against brick-and-mortar companies like JCPenney and Macy's. But JCPenney's actually had to declare bankruptcy, too. They just did that in the past week or so. And so now Hertz is the third one on the block. But Hertz is considerably concerning because Hertz is directly connected to the automobile industry. Hertz buys their cars from our automobile producers. So if Hertz is declaring bankruptcy, then that means they are buying less cars. That means, automobile producers such as Ford, Chevrolet, GM, all those companies, they are going to get hit in their sales because now one of their primary vendors that has been, buying their product, now one of their primary customers that, they were going to use to rent to their customers has now been cut short. So this is definitely a sign that the automobile industry is buckling. There have been reports now that Enterprise is also getting hit. I would suspect that other car rental companies are facing similar issues, but Hertz has been the first to start failing. And this is an overall symptom of a much larger problem, that is, we cannot continue having an economic system where we are not producing. We are essentially in a state of consuming our past capital. We're consuming what we have produced years and years ago that we have built up over time. And essentially, we're going back to the Dark Ages. We are going back to the Stone Age in our economy. The problem is that it's always been easier to destroy than it has been to create. To rebuild our economy, it will take more effort and longer time than it will to destroy it. Our economy has buckled and has collapsed in a matter of 2 months. My guess is that it will take us around the realm of at least 2 years, and this is a conservative estimate, I would say, 2 years to get back to where we were, probably longer. Some may say that the sacrifice was worth it because of saving lives. We've gone over this and we've covered this on our podcast before, that we're not saving lives, we're trading lives. There are people who die every single day because goods are not being produced. When people lose their incomes, when people lose their jobs, when people lose their homes, they lose their retirements, they lose their way of life, they become much more susceptible to the problems of life that can kill them. Shelter, we have shelter for a reason. We eat for a reason. We have health care for a reason. It's hard to have health care when you don't have health insurance because your health insurance came from your employer and now you've lost your job. And so there have been 39 million Americans now that have lost their job, which translates to an unemployment rate of well over 20%. That's Great Depression levels. So Hertz's crumbling is just a symptom of this much larger and graver problem and issue. This is just the beginning. We don't really recognize that there are problems in the economy until we're about 6 months into a recession. We're 2 months into a recession. To give you a frame of reference, for those of you who were old enough to remember the 2008 crisis, I know I was, most people, and that is the people who work jobs on Main Street, who do everyday things, they're not the financial elites, they're not the politically connected, they're not nerdy economists. Most people did not recognize that something was wrong in our economy until about the summer of 2008. But when you look up the Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, when you look up the bureau there, and you pull their statistics, they'll tell you that the recession actually started in the beginning of 2008. So that means for a period of about 6 months, until about maybe June, July, August, most people were unaware that the economy was falling apart. And yet, when the statistics were coming in, it had been falling apart for 6 months. We're 2 months into this, and things are already this bad now. They are going to be far worse 4 months from now. The mistaken idea that we will have done a sharp bottom out and on our way back to recovery in 4 months is extremely naive. Economies do not bounce back that easily, particularly with the problems that we do now. We have a lot of debt that we have to go through. The government and the Fed has injected even more debt, and so that has weighed us down even further. For whatever companies they are able to save by financializing their debt, they have basically turned more companies into zombie companies where they are barely alive. They're really undead, as we call it. They're not technically bankrupt because they have been flooded with so much cash and so much debt, but the debt is paralyzing them. They cannot use their cash to invest in new production assets or hire new workers to produce because they're holding so much debt that they need that cash to make their payments. So they technically exist, but they're not really growing. They're just there. So the economy has been paralyzed at best. And so at best, our outlook will probably be what has been commonly called stagflation. Now, stagflation was a type of economic phenomena it was a coined term by Milton Friedman in the 1970s to term the high unemployment, high inflation times of the 1970s. He called it stagflation. Stagflation was a situation that's described as where your economy is technically growing, but because the inflation rate was so high at that time, it pretty much ate up all the economic growth. Because, what if you produce 7% more goods, but prices went up 7% at the same time, and wages went up 7%, then in reality, you're not making any more money, and you're not really producing any more real goods once you count for the cost of living increases. Stagflation was also applied to our economy post-2008. There it was the reverse. Instead of having high inflation and growth, we had no inflation but no growth. Well, why? Well, one of those reasons is because our companies were holding such massive amounts of debt. They had been bailed out by the Fed and by the government in 2008. They were paralyzed. They were given an anesthetic. And from that point on, they technically were alive, but they were on life support. They were holding so much debt, they couldn't do anything with them. And we're in that situation now, but now it's 10 times worse because now there have been trillions upon trillions upon trillions more debt thrown in on our economy, on the backs of the American people. And instead of allowing the market to naturally work through the process of liquidating those debts, allowing those businesses to go bankrupt, which would free up those physical resources to be used by profitable companies that are a lot more financially solvent, a lot more financially healthy, and therefore a lot more capable of expanding, they have been eaten up by the existing companies because we believed that they were too big to fail or that their going out of business was bad for the economy. And this is a problem that is going on in mainstream economics today. Mainstream economics today looks at expansions as a good thing and recessions as a bad thing. The Austrian economists, which has been the major economic sect of the Libertarian Party, and if you're listening to this podcast, we are Libertarians. We come from a Libertarian perspective. So when we give you our economic analysis, it's outside the box. We think of this as a contrarian. We look at this from a completely different angle. To the Austrians, an expansion of the economy is fine when it's natural, when it's an unregulated free market with no federal government, no monetary policy intervening, no heavy taxations, and if there are any regulations, they are light and mild. This is not what we're going on through right now. So we don't look at the expansion as a good thing. We look at the expansion as a problem because we're looking at the situation and saying, really, our economy shouldn't be expanding right now. If it is expanding, there's a problem. And the problem is that it's expanding by debt creation. It's expanding by us accumulating more debt, going into more debt, dipping out of our savings, running up credit cards, running up personal loans, running up automobile loans, running up mortgage loans, running up corporate bonds, corporations lending out as much bonds as they can, taking that money, investors borrowing money on the margin, buying into the stock market, overbloating the stock market to epic proportions, banks creating so many loans, they don't have the cash to pay back those loans if those loans turn unprofitable, insurance companies that are turning financially insolvent because they have insured against losses that they cannot repay. All of that amounts up to a system that really should never have been expanded. The recession, to the Austrian economists, is the actual cure. It's not the problem. It's what's fixing the problem. The problem was debt. The recession is clearing out the debt. Now, that may feel bad. It may feel painful, just like a hangover feels bad to an alcoholic. But the answer to an alcoholic who is going through a hangover is not to drink more alcohol so the symptoms go away. That just creates the process again. It makes you go through another cycle, another bout, where you might get back into the party animal mood, and you might feel good, and the times are real good because you're drunk. And sure enough, when that drunkenness wears off, you'll go through another hangover. Medicine may taste bad, but medicine is good for you. And that's the Austrian prescription. It's a hard pill to swallow. It really is. But until our political and financial and economic elites start recognizing this, that their problems, that their solutions are actually creating the problems, and they're not solving the problems, nothing will change. And so nothing has changed. They've done this remedy so many times before in the past, and it's failed every time. They did this in the Great Depression. It failed. They did this after the Great Recession. It failed. They did this after the 2001 dot-com bubble. It failed. They're doing this now. Guess what the prediction is going to be? It failed. Albert Einstein once said that if you do an experiment, you do the experiment, you yield a result, and you repeat that experiment, it should yield the exact same result. To simply repeat the experiment over and over again and expect a different result is the very definition of insanity. So if Albert Einstein were alive today and were applying this thinking to the economists, he would conclude logically that they're all insane. They're doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. The phrase is always the common, this time will be different, this time is different, and of course, the beloved, it's not working, so that means we need to do more of it. And in so doing more of it, they have set us up for total economic collapse, which leads into my second point. And that is what the government has set us up to. And this has always been the Austrian boogeyman. This has been the thing that has set us up for a long time. We have been warning this for years, at least for a decade. And that is the threat of high price inflation. So there was an article that was posted by the by the Foundation for Economic Education. It's a libertarian Austrian economic website. Does a very good job, very, very well researched article. They tend to be more of the Hayekian flavor of Austrian economics, if you're into that, versus the Mises and Rothbardian types. There's very slight differences with them. They're still the same strands. But they post a great article about how all the monetary and stimulus has done the equivalent of loaded up a revolver of bullets with bullets. So they've loaded up a gun, and they have injected bullets into the gun. The bullets are the inflation. But the bullets themselves don't do any damage while they're loaded into the gun. It's only when the trigger is pulled that the inflation starts to manifest itself. And so what they're saying is that the Fed and the federal government, with all of its unprecedented monetary and fiscal interventions into the economy of handing out and printing money and sending paycheck after paychecks to American people, bailing out companies, sending them emergency loans, silencing the entire economy, preventing them from getting up and going to work, which has caused a huge crash in the amount that we have produced. They're saying that eventually will come a time where there's going to be more money chasing less goods, which by definition will drive up the price of those goods. That is just by very logic. And as I have pointed out, and I pointed this out last week, there are counterary forces on the international scale that kind of keep the balance of scales from tipping into that favor in the short run. One of those things is that the gas prices and the oil prices have plummeted in the last 2 months. Now, some of that had to do with the economic crash and the shutdown. People were driving less, people were flying less, people were working less, and so companies used less energy. And so that had a downward price onto gas and oil. But the other thing is that geopolitically, Saudi Arabia was increasing the oil supply. Now, I'm not going to go into the semantics of why they were increasing the oil supply because, quite frankly, it's not all that important. Not now anyway. But those counterary forces there are beginning to weaken. And the prices of gas and oil are going up. And the food prices have already been increasing. They increased by 2.7% for groceries last month. That's astronomical on a yearly basis. That's over 30% price inflation. It's just being hidden in the statistics when the Federal Reserve and the Economic Bureau of Research comes out and says, oh, well, prices fell. Yeah, they may have fallen on the aggregate, but the things that matter to us right now, which is food, shelter, and gas, two of the three are going up. Gas is not, but gas is now going up. So guess what? That's 3 of 3. So pretty soon we're going to be seeing rising price inflation even on their metrics. And right now they have not even rebalanced their metrics right now to account for the fact that people are probably spending more of their cash on food and spending more of their cash on shelter versus, luxury goods because they don't have the money to pay on those luxury goods. I mean, they're not buying clothes. JCPenney just closed. They're not buying cars. They're not buying automobile transportation. Why are we waiting at the same? If they were, Hertz wouldn't be going under. Automobile companies would not be suffering, but they are. So those prices will be forced up. And remember what I said is that usually we don't see that there's a problem until we're 6 months into it. We're 2 months in right now. In 4 months, I can easily see a situation where unless things have a dramatic, miraculous reversal, we will undergo price inflation. And it will be something akin to a shock to the public, a shock to investors, but it will be something that the Fed officials and the economists will come out and try to soothe people over and say it's not a bad thing. And they'll come out with excuses to try to downplay the threat of inflation. One of the things that they will say is that when inflation starts to tick up, they will use the year-over-year metrics, and they'll say, well, compared to this time last year, inflation only went up by 2%. That's right in line with our targets. We're good to go. No problems there. When inflation ticks up to 3% from a year ago, they'll say, well, it would normally be a problem, but you see, we've had so long of subpar 2% growth because to the monetary economists, to mainstream economics today, they have this mythical idea that 2% inflation is the magic number to utopia. So as long as the CPI inflation rate is 2%, it's great. If it's less than 2%, it's a problem. If it's more than 2%, it's a problem. But they will, when the CPI starts to rise initially, they'll try to say, well, that would be a problem, except for so long before, the CPI inflation rate was 0 to 1%. So, when you take that average, and they'll try to use these long-term averages like 5 years, 10 years, whatever, they'll say, it's not really much of a problem. But then as it begins to build, it will become a problem. And unfortunately now, the inflation rate will be a much bigger problem than it was in the 1970s and the 1940s and the 1910s. Why? Because unlike then, now we have blown up an incredible debt bubble. We have more debt now than we ever have had before in history. Our total liabilities, and this number I'm about to quote you, was before all the Fed and monetary and fiscal stimulus that was done by our federal government in the first quarter and the second quarter of 2020. Our total liabilities, total amount of debt that we owed, calculated by the Federal Reserve, was $73 trillion. To put you in a frame of reference, our economy only produced $20 trillion in quarter 4 of 2019, which means that the amount of money that we owed, the total debt, was over 3.5 times our economic GDP growth. That's insane. That is insane. So I wanted to leave that thought with you, that amount of debt compared to our GDP was nowhere near that amount in the 70s, nor in the 40s, nor in the 1910s. So just take that and weight it. Pam, we've got just a little bit of background noise going on right there. we have a caller that is on the phone.
Yeah, I have John who wanted to talk about your theories with you. So,
Sure.
and I know we have
Let's
a guest.
have John on.
We have a guest waiting too. So here's John. Welcome to Anti-Federalist Radio.
Hey, John.
Hello.
You're on Anti-Federalist Radio. What can we do for you?
Well, no, I just wanted to. I found your ideas intriguing as into anti-federalism. You don't see that much. Wouldn't you agree that the government can basically manipulate the monetary flow? Wouldn't you also agree that any debt that we incurred could easily be wiped out? We owe most of it to ourselves, and it could be easily wiped away by the stroke of the pen. Isn't all this a game? Doesn't it come down to that? You don't agree with that?
There's a difference between the we and ourselves. The we and ourselves are not the same. When we say that we owe it to ourselves, the ourselves of who we owe it to is quite different than the we. So it's not the same as we borrow the money against ourselves. It is a sense of we borrow the money against other people, and we owe that money back to that people, and that has severe effects into our economy.
All right, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, okay? And after World War II, the French and the English owed us a substantial amount of money. We forgave them their debts. Don't you think the same thing is likely to happen here if we ever were to get into any kind of a crisis? Because any crisis would be affected globally, and for the sake of all global parties, it would be better off to start with a clean slate than to go through any kind of massive problem. Meanwhile, in between that process, you can manipulate the debt, you can manipulate inflation artificially to increase it or decrease it any way you want to. You were talking about gas before. Trump has artificially increased gas prices for the ideas of fracking in this economy since he's been in office. Gas is worth about $25 a gallon. Any expert will tell you that in 5 years it'll be worth 10. I mean, there's so much of it. We have a glut. But yet these people want to frack, and they need a $70 oil price, at least 40, in order to make their money back. And you see the price of oil going up, or you saw it going up before this hesitation happened here. I'm saying to you, isn't this all a game? I say again, can't we call off our own debts, and can't we manipulate whatever we want to manipulate until the time comes that we need to start afresh again and everybody start all over? Isn't this about powerful elite people actually playing Monopoly?
Joe, you mind if I take this?
No, it's not. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with that, because when you start to cancel debt, you inevitably have to tell the lenders who lent the money out that you're not getting your money back. That money then turns into a loss for the lenders. They take those capital losses, and whatever they use to lend that debt out, those assets that was, because that money was used to purchase an asset. When they created that loan, they purchased an asset. They purchased a bond. They purchased a security. That asset's value plummets. So if they used to purchase a government bond, and then the government decided to say, you know what, we're not going to pay you back, the amount of interest rates that would go straight through the roof, they would shoot through the roof, because now the risk of buying a government bond has increased to such astronomical amounts that nobody and their grandma would buy a government debt security. Now, granted, that would mean that the government debt would be wiped out, but the government would never be able to borrow again. Now, some libertarians have proposed this, because the reason why they propose this is that, politically speaking, they would want to restrict the government and say the government should never run debt again. So there is actually, right now, there's been a couple of libertarian candidates that have proposed to canceling the debts. But the problem is that if they did cancel the debts, then whoever loaned that money to them will take the losses. So there will always be a financial loss in that system. Now, as for the fracking situation that's going on, I don't believe that fracking has increased the price of gas. I believe it's contributed to the decrease in the price of gas. When oil prices were over $100 a barrel, before fracking was really starting to go mainstream, before we had found a way to tap into shale increased the supply of oil available to be used. Before, it was perceived that in large parts it was too costly to tap into that shale oil. And because it was so costly to tap into that shale oil, that supply was not counted. It was not counted as part of the supply. So that kept the price of oil high relative to supply. But once that shale oil was accessible, all of a sudden now we had to revalue the amount of supplies in the system, and it caused an immediate supply shock that increased the glut and created a glut of oil into the system that drastically dropped gas prices over time, and eventually it led to a position where geopolitically Saudi Arabia, Russia, and eventually other countries like Venezuela had to cut back oil production because the United States was increasing their oil production, which then led to a boom in after 2015 and 2016 in the United States, and it led to the collapse of the Venezuelan economies, the Saudi Arabia economy, and Russia's economy. So there are always going to be Cantillon effects, side effects from that.
Well, that's because Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Russia are based off of oil. Okay, that's the reason it led to a fall on their part. Nobody else is based off of oil. If you look at the economists, if you look at people in this industry, and I know some of the people in this industry, okay, and they play the equities market, okay. Oil's worth $25 a gallon. Okay, nobody uses it anymore. We make 90% of what we need, 97% of what we need. The Europeans are getting off of it completely. Okay, so, I mean, the only people that are using this now are the Russians, the Saudi Arabians, who are stuck because that's their whole economy, and the Venezuelans. So, I mean, obviously, they're going to have a problem based on that. But when you talk about we can't forget our debt, I bring you back to the examples I used before, and I'll give you one more. France and England are both, and they seem to be doing away. Since World War II, we had one of the strongest economies after the bailout up till 1970 that we have had. Your parents and my parents made a great deal of money in that process, okay? We seem to be the ones who are struggling now. That's number one. Number two, we can add to the bailout of England and France, Greece. Look at the Greeks playing the Europeans, and every time they keep coming around saying, okay, are you going to pay off your debt now? The Greeks say, well, yeah, okay, we'll make a deal, and then, okay, we're not going to do with the deal, and we're going to go back on the deal, and we're going to do the whole thing. Right. They keep playing Europe back and forth because they know it's a game. So, oh, you're going to cut me off.
What happened to our caller? Okay, well, that was John.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I muted myself. He did not get dropped. I accidentally muted him real quick, and then I brought him back on. So I apologize for that. But that was just that 1 second drop there. I know that okay. I wanted to bring a couple things up, and you know I am not a libertarian. I am not. You and I have had arguments about this. I'm just the board operator for the show, but I have a liberal show, and we've talked, you and I, in our conversations and on the show that you've come in and given your economic viewpoints about two things that are going on here that would probably help with clearing up, giving perspective to what this guy is saying about the debts. And one is, you know, what got us into the 2008 thing. A great book and movie that you and I have talked about that people should go out, watch, read is The Big Short. And it's not necessarily that there's all these debts here; it's that people are buying the debt. So that's part of it, and you can talk more about that if you wanted to do that on this show, but I think you should bring that up. And the other thing is when he kept on talking about economy and the dollar and all, you explained it to me beautifully in the past about the fact that the price of oil is tied to the dollar, and there's a lot to be said about that in our economy. But I'm going to go ahead and back off. I was just trying to help bring that guy into what your conversation is.
No. Well, let me take this one and explain it simply because it can be explained somewhat simply. And, John, I hope you're there. I am sorry that we cut you off. Talking about wiping the slate clean, to wipe the slate clean, we do, like we said, we borrow from ourselves, but it's not the we and it's not ourselves. We borrow from our own banks. We borrow from the Federal Reserve banks. And to wipe ourselves clean is to stick it to them, which, you know, I have no sympathy for them. I don't care about these banks. They can, you know, I won't cry any tears for them. But to stick it to them and say we're not paying back our debt is to also lose who we borrow from. As we've seen, we need to continue borrowing. So what we tend to do historically is we, through the Federal Reserve and through fractional reserve banking, we borrow and run away from it through inflation. And it's a game you can play as long as you don't play it too hard and the little guy, you and I down here at the bottom, can kind of keep up with prices. If inflation gets too extraordinary, then we start looking like the Weimar Republic. You can't forgive your own debt the same way you can forgive another country's debt. You referenced how we forgave England and France and how the European Union forgave Greece. What we will do is continually run away from it through inflation and play that numbers game. You're right, it's a numbers game. We can play that inevitably. What it is Keynesian economics. We made the decision when we adopted the Federal Reserve to be Keynesian. And it's a question that was asked of Keynes. There's an inevitable endpoint to this where we keep borrowing and we keep borrowing and we keep borrowing, and it's going to turn into inflation. It's going to turn into inflation. We can't ever pay it back. It keeps turning into inflation. How does this end? What's our off-ramp? To which Keynes said, I can't quote it exactly, but he basically said, well, we'll all be dead by then. That was 100 years ago, and you and I are the ones that get to inherit the we'll all be dead economy. Our deal is essentially either hyperinflated or cancel our ability to borrow. Wiping the slate is eliminating our ability to borrow. Hyperinflating is sticking it to the little guy, and that's the binary choice there. And that is why Joe and I are in the camp of Austrian economics, which is where we stop doing this ridiculous borrowing.
That's a great point, Joe. And let me just add, John, and I'm sorry that we did have to cut you off. Unfortunately, we do have to move on. We've got another segment to cover. But I do want to add just one last point. When it comes to canceling that debt, what I mean is that there will always be consequences for the debt. That was the point that I was trying to get. It's not like it was just a numbers game where it is a double entry accounting, and so therefore you can cancel that out. That kind of bookkeeping goes on every single day of the week. But when it comes to debt transactions, there's always a lender, there's always a borrower. The borrower is not always the lender. That's the key thing. The lenders and borrowers are different. There will be winners or losers in this. Now, ultimately, in the end, I believe we will have to come to that point where debt will be canceled out. That's what a recession does. It's a natural canceling out of the debt. But the difference is that it's set up by the market and not set up by government forces. The market will sort out what's good debt, what's bad, what needs to stay, what needs to go. And now as Austrians, we ultimately believe that the market will set that process up correctly in the best possible way for the best outcome for the most amount of people. But we appreciate your comments on there. You seem to be a very well-educated man. We encourage you to come back on. But Joe, do you have any other comments on what we have been covering for the past 30 minutes?
No, I'm ready to roll on.
All right. Well, then I tip my hat and I hand off to you. Run with it, Joe.
All right. So you did mention earlier you talked about the armed protests going on in some places, and you referenced what has been happening in North Carolina and what I was attending today. I want to clarify one thing immediately at the start of this. We were not protesting, and we were not demonstrators. In North Carolina, it is illegal. I've got the law pulled up right now. whipping it out so I can quote it more or less directly. It shall be unlawful for any person participating in, affiliated with, or present as a spectator at any parade, funeral procession, picket line, or demonstration upon any private health care facility or upon any public place owned or under the control of the state or any of its political subdivisions to willfully or intentionally possess or have immediate access to any dangerous weapon. It's a Class 1 misdemeanor you do, and a Class 1 misdemeanor can be up to 120 days in jail. That article you actually posted in talking about this, where it says Raleigh PD is investigating armed protesters, in that article it basically says, well, if they say they're not protesters, they're not protesters. Are they protesting something? We were not. What I was out there doing today with Meal Team 6, if you want to look them up on Facebook, that is what they are calling themselves, Meal Team 6. We walked around and we handed out food to people. We were armed. We weren't protesting. We weren't demonstrating. We were out on the streets feeding the hungry. I mean, you and I have gone on quite a bit about the economic damages of this shutdown and the people that are out in the rain for it, and we just kind of forget about them or pretend everything's going to be okay and we're just going to wish this all away, or that unemployment is handling that, which it's not. We were out on the street helping the little guy. I am absolutely terrible with names, but we met some pretty excited people. Met a Marine Corps veteran who loved what we were doing. Met a Navy veteran who's out of work right now. Talked to him for a little bit and gave him some food. I was late to the party. I had to jog to catch up, but I probably fed 10 or 12 people in our walk around, and I don't know how many people they helped before then. They were out the week prior. They didn't feed anybody the week prior. They just went out for a sandwich. This group, Meal Team 6, and they got a ton of media coverage over it. The real famous picture is the guy that was in line at Subway with a rocket launcher. It was an AT-4. It was empty. It was just the tube. But let me read you the list real quick of some of the big media outlets that picked us up. TMZ, NBC, CBS, and New York Post. We got some Twitter attention from Kathy Griffin and Mia Farrow. That was, well, I'll cut to the chase. Point is, a lot of people spoke for this group, called them protesters, called them this, that, and the other, and we happened to have the leader of the group on the line, Ryan. I hope, Pam, is Ryan in the group? Is Ryan ready to go?
I'm right here.
Oh, excellent. Well, Ryan, I'm not going to grill you and make this an interview. This is small time. It's just us and whoever's listening. But this is your opportunity to represent yourself. Go nuts.
All right. So what's going on? You know, obviously this has always been an issue. This isn't a new thing. But particularly lately with the Reopen North Carolina protests, the police have been setting a precedent of arresting peaceful protesters. And they have established a pattern of doing this. All we're doing, we wanted to make an effort to show, you know, even if you're going to arrest peaceful protesters, we're going to go keep on living our lives anyway. And if you're going to arrest peaceful people, then we're going to go ahead and kid up before we go out. And we're just trying to, and we were down walking around downtown, and we saw some last week. We had stopped at a CVS to get some drinks, and we saw quite a few homeless people who had been, you know, hurt, particularly by the lockdowns for coronavirus. It's just making it harder for everybody to earn a living, even harder than it was for some people before. And man, most of us don't carry cash or anything for these things, so we didn't have a lot we could do to help them out then. But we got to thinking, and we just wanted to do something to help out people in that situation. So at this point, we're still going out. We're you know, same thing. We're going out. We're going armed and armored. If they're going to arrest peaceful protesters, we're going to continue to live our lives, prepared to defend our ability to live our lives, and help people out. We're just looking to help people while people are going through a hard time. That's really what it comes down to.
I like the way you worded it, and you did reinforce the major point here. Police are arresting peaceful protesters. At the big Reopen NC rally, there were arrests made, and when people asked why they were arrested, because there wasn't any mention of social distancing violations or anything like that, Raleigh PD said in a statement on Twitter, protesting is not an essential activity. That was a statement made by a police force, is your First Amendment rights are on hold, can it?
Right.
So,
when the government gets to decide when, what, and how you can protest, you have a problem.
Exactly. And one of the first answers I get when I talk about open carry protests and things like this, and mind you, today our little walkthrough, our little meal feeding was, I am not going to call it a protest. We were not protesting. We were just out feeding people. But that was the first thing like that I've ever done, armed. The first question I get is, what do you think would have happened if you were black? What do you think would have happened if those armed protesters were black? I have an answer.
We actually have to the Black Panthers. Is that where you were going with that?
We don't know they were Black Panthers. They were carrying a Pan-African flag, but we did see them out there. I tried to look them up on Facebook. I couldn't find them.
They were being live streamed by a couple people, and it does appear that people appear to have identified them as Black Panthers. I don't know that was necessarily correct, but that does seem to be what other people are saying. I haven't been able to personally verify that.
I would love to reach out to that group if you can find them. But that's the thing is, right after these armed protests were gaining national coverage, we talked about the Ahmaud Arbery shooting either last week or the week before. The Black Panthers in Georgia carried out an armed protest on the street where he was killed. It was
they had an awesome response to that.
Exactly. It was Panther Special Operations Command. That's a Facebook group, Atlanta chapter. And, I mean, it was absolutely awesome, the stuff they were posting about it, but this was an armed protest, and it made a very strong point. No, black armed protesters don't get shot at by police. And I'm going to explain why. Because strategically...
Well, today, the group we saw today was actually told... I'm not clear on exactly where they were. I'm trying to get more information on it, but it's a little bit hard to come by right now. It was I forget the name of the guy, but you'd be able to hunt him down. He's done live streams of us before, and his live streams have actually brought in more views than our live streams have in some cases. But he had stopped live streaming us and gone to live stream them. Apparently, while walking through an area that we had walked through, they were told by the police that it was a gun-free area and they were not allowed to open carry there after we were able to. And that's why I have invited the Black Panthers to our events. I would be happy for them to come join us. I would also be happy for them to come join us because then we have twice as many people, and then it's not black people with guns and white people with guns. Then it's a bunch of people with guns.
I agree. Like I said to you today, I believe we are going to have to join them. They have a very specific message they're catering, and I believe they'll probably want to keep that pure. And if they want to keep that ethnocentric and keep their groups black, I understand that. That's their choice to make. But if they're willing to take in people sympathetic to the cause, I am more than happy to carry a weapon in support of people who are just trying to be treated like human beings. But to make the point I was stating, police are not going to enact violence against an armed group. Now, we see on the news all the time that an unarmed man was killed because the officer thought he was armed. But when there's actually a weapon and a group of weapons, officers don't do anything. Now, they could have come up to us and said the same thing, but at the end of the day, if a police officer walks up to a group of, I think there were 9 of us, and says, you can't be here with those weapons.
Being 10, yes, somewhere in there.
Was it 10? If you come up to me and you say, you can't be here with those weapons, and I just say, no. As an officer, you've now got to weigh your risks and benefits. And if I don't want to be compliant, then you have to amass enough. I mean, obviously, Raleigh PD has enough people. They have the resources. But you, the officer, now have to make this such a big thing that you bring enough police officers to subdue and arrest 9 or 10 armed individuals. That's a spectacle. That is a huge
That actually
thing.
happened last week. That it did actually happen. They came up to us and told us because there were counter-protesters to our non-protest, now our non-protest was a protest because they had signs, so we were not allowed to open carry. So we ignored them and kept on keeping on. And
Exactly.
they didn't do anything.
It's a matter of risk analysis. That the group we saw had one weapon. We were across the street. We were across the street and their left sides were exposed to us. So maybe there were some open carry pistols on some right hips that I couldn't see. But from where we were, I could only see the guy up front was carrying. It was one armed protester. They were black. They're going to get a different response from police than we do. But the point is, nobody was hurt. Nobody was hurt in Georgia. They were even live streaming in Georgia. Yep, police are down the street, but they're not coming down here because the guys in Georgia rolled heavy. The guy who's been posting his picture the most, he had an FN Scar. That's like an $1,800 rifle, and he was wearing body armor. But if you want to know what happens when black people open carry, look at the 1960s in California. LAPD loved. I mean, there was so much police brutality going on against minorities, against black people. The Black Panthers started to open carry in their own neighborhoods. They were patrolling their own neighborhoods. They called it cop watching. Ironically, it's the same phrase we use now when you're videotaping police to keep them in line. The Black Panthers didn't have cell phones. They didn't have that kind of access. So they open carried rifles. And it worked.
Right.
Police are a lot less inclined to do something really stupid when it could cost them their life. So what happened?
Yeah.
Well, the famously gun-loving bastion of freedom and bastion of Second Amendment rights that is Ronald Reagan was the governor at the time in California, and he banned open carry in the state. And he said something, I can't remember the exact words, but this is not going to affect any law-abiding citizen. The Black Panthers actually marched on the Capitol the same way that white people have done in Virginia and in Kentucky and in Michigan. They marched on the Capitol to fight that, and they lost. And, I mean, have black people been safer for being deprived of that right? They've been stigmatized. I've said this before. I want to support that so badly. I want to support and destigmatize the open carry of weapons by the African-American community. I didn't even realize that was going to be the focal point of our conversation tonight, but it is one that I keep coming back to because I'm passionate about it. I work in a very big retail store. I'm an essential worker. I have seen the trend of more and more open carry by African-Americans and more open carry by African-American women. I'm seeing more and more mothers out here strapped up to keep their kids and themselves safe, and I love that because the thing is, if you want to demand that right and make a big thing of it somewhere, I can go and I can stand next to you, and I can give you the strength of numbers, but I cannot put on your skin and be an open-carrying black man out in my daily life. I have been in situations where I've had to interact with police officers while open-carrying by myself, and I've had them look at me in the eyes and go, it's your God-given right. I've had officers tell me that. I have never had to be Philando Castile.
As long as you're white.
I have never been shot for legally carrying a weapon. I can't give you that strength and security in numbers, and I can't ask anyone to assume that risk for themselves. I can support your decision, but I can't ask anybody, hey, you should go and you should start open carrying. It might get you killed, but it'll help destigmatize, and it'll make it a safer experience for the next generation of black gun owners. You know, our generation of gun owners are finally trying to, rebuild that, Black Lives Matter and the firearms community are finally seeing eye to eye on things. The last parents' generation of firearms owners, it was like they felt like they had to choose sides between, Back the Blue and Black Lives Matter, and they chose blue. Our generation, I think it was the red flag laws. I think it was the red flag laws where we are not so pro-police, like the last generation of firearms owners are. And I can't undo the last 100 years of failures by the NRA and the firearms community. All I can do is try to be supportive of this new generation of brave young black people that are willing to carry a weapon and speak out for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add?
No, I mean, as far as that's concerned, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it there. I mean, like you said, I'm willing to go. I told people, someone said they would be uncomfortable coming to one of our events because they were a black man. I said, man, if you come out and something starts to go down, I will physically stand between you and whatever it is. That goes for other people too. If people want to come out to these events, I will physically put myself between you and whatever a threat is. I will prioritize your physical well-being over mine. I will happily defend you. I show up in body armor. You know, I can catch a couple bullets.
Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But anybody interested that's in the North Carolina area, Ryan, tell us about Meal Team 6. Tell us about how often you're going to be doing this. You know, network yourself here in case anybody wants to join in with you next week. All
right. So right now this is prone to change going forward as the restrictions open up around the virus. As of right now, we are going to continue meeting every Saturday at 11 a.m. at 101 North Wilmington Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. It's the big open parking lot in the capital area. We'll be meeting up between 10:30 and 11, and then we'll try to be on the road between 11 and 11:15. It looks like at this point we are going to continue to do a lot of actual meal events where we'll do. So if someone comes out to these, and even if you're not willing to come do the armed walk part, bring some sort. We would really appreciate if people would bring some sort of food or donate towards providing food so that we can bring more out to give to people. I think we're going to have some great opportunities to increase the amount that we're going to be able to give out in an event, and I'd really like to be able to give out as much as possible and not run out halfway through feeding people. Every Saturday we'll be doing that. It may go down to once or twice a month in the future as things start to loosen up, but we really do want to keep this going and keep doing some good for the community.
Glad to hear it. I won't be able to make it in the near weekends because I usually work Saturdays. This was a special occasion for me. But I would also like to point out that what Ryan's doing as a Libertarian is not unique. I'm associated with the Libertarian Party of UNCG and the Libertarian Party of Guilford County. And in Guilford County, we realized you can't play partisan politics by the rules that are established, because the rules that are established are for a duopoly, and they are there to protect the two-party system. If you're a third party, you don't get any federal funding unless you get 5% of the popular vote, but you can't get 5% of the popular vote without the added funding and the marketing and the promotion that comes with it. You don't land on a debate stage until you hit 15% of the vote, but it's almost impossible to get 15% of the vote if you don't get to stand on the debate stage. That's the game. And what we've realized is, well, how do we combat this? We reinvent grassroots partisan politics. One of the big things is, well, if we go libertarian, libertarians are anti-welfare. Libertarians are anti-welfare. Oh, you want everybody to starve. You only care about yourself. No. We believe that grassroots helping your neighbor type welfare is the way to go. Guilford County and UNCG, we run a food bank. Myself and another member of Guilford County, we dropped off about 300 cans at, good Lord, I really cannot remember the name of, good Lord, that's terrible. Urban Ministries, there we go, Urban Ministries. We dropped off about 300 cans at Urban Ministries, and 5 people bought those 300 cans. I do not believe that my tax dollars going towards welfare are being spent so efficiently that I fed that many people compared to what I just elected to do by myself. We've got a gentleman who's homeless who's reached out to our organization. He just said, hey, I'm in this situation. I'm living in a tent. The 5 of us have donated camping equipment to him. We're donating food to him. this is what libertarian welfare looks like. It's no bureaucracy. There's no administration. You don't have to prove your dire need. And you don't get put on a waiting list for 2 months to get a letter in the mail that says, well, you didn't fill out the paperwork properly. You message us on Facebook. We meet you with food. It's potentially dangerous. When I meet a stranger by myself, I could be incurring risk. But that's my decision to make. I incur the risk. As a firearms owner, I am willing to take those kinds of risks because I am able to protect myself. I'm not scared to involve myself with the downtrodden. And we're out here actually feeding people. And I really do believe we're doing it more efficiently than the government. And you're doing the same thing. That's what we did today. This is what libertarian protests are starting to look like, is literally, our protests and our rallies are turning into charity events. And all
we're proving our point. We are
exactly.
We are demonstrating that we can do this. Yeah. This is not just theoretical anymore. This is a proof of concept. And it has, at this point, I would argue that it's been proven. We're showing that we can do it. We provided probably 20 or 30 people with lunch today, which isn't crazy, but for the size group we had, that's not a bad start.
It's not at all. Joe, do you have anything to add or any questions for Ryan?
Yeah, I do have a couple of things to add. So I'm sorry, but I was kept out of the loop on this. No, I'm kidding. I had no idea that Mule Team 6 was all that this was about. And you see, this is the problem that we have with getting our message out to newspaper agencies. The way I looked at it through the articles, and I looked at 3 different articles, they all did the same thing. Armed protesters storming Raleigh are causing contention, and in reality what you were doing was sending a message. And your message was quite simple. Yeah, we have the right. We have the right to wear arms. We have the right to bear them, but we're not out here to intimidate anyone. We're here to actually become charitable to people. We're actually, supplying food. So, Ryan, I want to connect with you through Anti-Federalist Radio, and we want to kind of expand upon you, or at least, give you kind of a platform a little bit to help expand Mule Team 6 and support that, because you guys are doing such an awesome job.
Oh, that would be awesome. And yeah, if I can I have just a minute to do a little mini rant here?
Go right ahead.
What you're talking about with the media. The media has come out for the last 3 weeks. They have taken pictures, done interviews, done everything they can to either misquote, misunderstand, or ignore everything we say that could possibly be interpreted positively. They've cast us in as negative a light as possible. They have ignored facts. They have twisted what facts they don't ignore. And then now, today, we went out and we did something that there was no way that they could have found a negative way to twist it. You know how many articles I've seen so far today? I keep up with this every day. Normally, by the time I leave the rally, I drive home, I check my phone. Normally there's 4, 5, 6 articles up. There's new pictures. You know how many new pictures, how many new articles I've seen today? 0. Because the media doesn't care when you're actually doing something. They do care when you're doing something that they can sensationalize. They very specifically ignored the one day. They came out and they left partway through. This is the only time they've left in the middle of an event, because they don't want to cover us doing positive things. They want to cover things that they can twist and make us the bad guy. All of a sudden, we're not the bad guys anymore, and that doesn't work for them.
It's the same reason you never see pictures of armed black rallies, because you can't portray the black protesters as angry little dick white Trump supporters. You literally can't portray them in that light, so you just don't portray them as anything. And I am actually devastated by the lack of media coverage, because the guy that was actually coming up close to us, he didn't speak to us, but he was within 5-10 feet with us a few times, had a really nice camera, and I am seriously due for a new Facebook profile picture, and I was looking forward to having a new one to put up that was taken with decent camera equipment and not my forward-facing
That's where mine are
camera.
coming from now. Yeah, that's where all my profile pictures are coming from now. Hang on, actually, give me just a second. Let me see if there's anything that I might have missed that's gone up so far. Let's see, Raleigh protest. Yep, nothing. It does not look like a single news source has published an article about today. No new pictures. Yeah, they pretended today didn't happen. Is how that went.
Two different armed groups walked
like,
by each other and waved at each other, and we didn't get a single bit of coverage.
So it looks like to me what we're going to do in order to spread the message is we're going to have to go underground. So one of the things I like to do is that, Ryan, you said that you guys had recorded videos of this.
We are running live streams. Yeah.
Yep.
So we have. I don't want to go into a lot of detail about why. I don't want to go into a lot of background to this. I would be happy to explain this to you in person, but this isn't something I want to throw out on air. But we have somebody who's managing. He has found a way to where they can manage about 3 or 4 live streams at once and put them together so people can bounce between them in one place. We're still working on getting the setup going. We're working on setting up communications. But I believe we had 2 live streams running. I run off a body cam setup, and then that gets bounced around. You can find that my main Facebook account is on ban from live streaming for like another 2-3 weeks. So I'm live streaming through my alt page Punk Rock Arafat right now. That's what Kathy Rippin called me. So I'm running with that moniker. I actually kind of like it. So you can find the live stream there if somebody wants to actually watch the entire event. I'm also posting those videos on my page, The Anarcho Gun Guy, and posting them to my main Facebook page, which is under Benjamin Ryan Teeter. All of that should be public, so anyone who's listening can look it up and take a look at it. Shoot me a message if you have any questions. I will try to respond on any of those 3 sources to anyone who would like to find anything out about it.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I'd like to ask you is that with your permission, I'd like to at least share a couple of those videos on our Facebook page and just let them know that you're out there, that you exist. This is what you guys are doing. You're not the monster hiding underneath the bed. Quite frankly, you're the guys that are actually lending a helping hand to some starving people, and right now they need it.
Everything on my page is public information. Anything I ever put on any Facebook page, whether it's my actual Anarcho Gun Guy page, whether it's my personal page, whether it's my alt page, if you see it on there, it is public information. You can use it for whatever you would like.
Awesome. Joe, do you have anything else?
I'm pretty happy with it, and we're running pretty late on time. Ryan, it was great to have you. When you inevitably get arrested,
really
I'll start your GoFundMe for your bail. That was a joke. I hope that doesn't happen.
Again. That's not a joke, though. I wish that was a joke.
It is what it is. I think we're going to wrap up.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was great having you. Yeah, Joe, we can conclude.
All right, well, that ends today's episode. We thank all the participants who have been involved in creating this wonderful episode today. If you want to reach out to us, you can email us at antifederalistradio@gmail.com. You can also reach us out on Facebook at Anti-Federalist Space Radio. That's our Facebook page. You can list us out there. You'll find us on Blog Talk Radio. You can find us on Spotify. You'll find us on Stitcher and Google Podcasts, TuneIn, and others podcasts. Tune in to us weekly. We will be updating with these episodes and giving you live coverage of the economic and political events that are going on today. Thank you, guys, and this is Joe. I'm signing out.